Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Best of the Pedalshift Project. On this edition, we are doing a revisit to a segment all the way back in episode 008. So we're in the Bond villain, the Bond agent era when every episode was a new Bond agent and or Bond villain, because some of them, became villains, right? Well, episode 008 features, I think, undoubtedly, which contradicts itself, but one of my favorite stories about bicycle touring. This is a story I tell all the time. It is called The Sweater. I hope you enjoy, and we'll see you next week. So I like to get on a bike, throw a lot of camping gear on the bike, usually in waterproof bags, and go places. I like to camp when I'm doing it, and that's called bike touring. I kind of prefer to do it solo. I like people. I'm not averse to hanging out with people, but I usually like the riding experience to be separate from other people. A few years ago, I was biking from Portland to San Francisco, which seems like a big deal to a lot of people, but I met a lot of others on that same ride that were going much further, Alaska to Mexico even. And the reason why it was kind of a big deal for me was the year before I tried the same trip and I didn't make it. I ran out of time and I had to turn around, and that was a big disappointment. So that year, I was really determined to make sure that I would make it and do it and succeed. And it's kind of as I learned the year before, not easy. There's very little margin for error. So you have to be really mindful of all of that if you want to succeed, if you want to meet your goals. And one of the days on this, I learned something really important, and it took me to lose something to find something, and has kept me coming back riding long distances ever since then. It was a really long day. I think it was the longest day I had, just because of the way the towns were set up and where I needed to go, and I needed Wi-Fi, and I needed all of these different things, and I needed to go, I think it was 75 miles, which, for a lot of people is not a really big deal, but for me, 75 miles when you're riding a loaded touring bike, that's a really big deal. So I was going to this overpriced commercial campground near Crescent City, California, crossing through Oregon, in the southern part of the state, and getting there, hopefully before the sun went down, and being able to relax a little bit. When I go bike touring, I'm independent. So I don't have any helpers. I don't have any vans. I don't have anybody hauling my stuff. Everything that I take with me is on my bike, and it's hanging off of it in some way, shape, or form, and usually bungeed to it. So I have a little bit of food. I have a fair amount of camping gear, and basically one set of clothes. And that's enough. That's 30 pounds of gear on a 28-pound bike, and that's a lot of weight that you're pedaling up and over hills and sometimes mountains. But basically everything I carry matters, and there's just not a lot of room for error. I don't carry anything extra. I don't carry anything superfluous. So I roll into this town called Brookings, Oregon, and it was about time for lunch. It'd been pretty hilly day. I was pretty tired, but I knew I had that extra 20 miles to go. So it was a good time to break. It was about 55 degrees. I remember there was a bank with, the thermometer on it, rotating between the time and the temperature. And so the temperature was, I think, 55 degrees. And the time kept taunting me because I was sort of like, all right, well, I could take a break here. I need a break here, but I still have at least 2 hours to go. And so knowing I wanted to get back before the sun went down and before it got too late, that rotating sign kept looking at me. Hey, it's 55 degrees. Hey, time's running out. Hey, it's 54 degrees. Hey, time's running out. So it was cool enough while I was taking my break that the heat that I built up during the ride was ebbing away. So I have a wool sweater on with me, dug it out of my bag, and I put it on. And that was great because wool's really great and it keeps you warm. And it's too warm for when you're riding. So by the time I hopped back on my bike after my break, took it off, bungeed it to the back of the bike, and rolled on. So as I'm going, the rest sort of wore off really quickly, and my butt started to hurt, and I was achy. Basically, I was done with everything by the time I hit the California border, which I think was maybe another 5 miles down. And, anytime you cross a state border, you got to hop off your bike and take a very necessary state border selfie. And I did that, and then I realized I still have about 15 miles to go. So welcome to California. Let's get going. And so I went. And luckily it was pretty flat. But it was the longest 15 miles ever. Finally, I'm just so cooked. And I get to this commercial campground. And I pay some obnoxious price for basically just a piece of grass in their back of their lot there. And, it's obnoxious, but at the same time, they had Wi-Fi and showers and laundry, so I probably would have paid twice that much and still called it obnoxious. So I start pulling out all my stuff and unpacking, and I'm very deliberate when I take stuff off. I pull off my tent. I pull out my camp stove. I pull out all of the different things, and then all of a sudden I start feeling a little bit chilly because, it wasn't as warm because I got off the bike, and I'm looking, and I'm digging, and there's no sweater. So my mind is racing. I mean, where did I last have that sweater? It's pretty chilly, and I don't carry an extra sweater, and I don't carry an extra thing to stay warm. I just had that sweater. And my mind is going all over the place. Where was I? I had it in Brookings, and, it was chilly, and then I was ready to hop back on the bike, and I put it onto the rear rack, and I bungeed it down, and that's when I realized. It probably came right out of there at some point in the last 20 miles between Brookings, Oregon, and that obnoxiously overpriced campground. I can't remember how many stages of grief there are in psychology. It's either 5 or 7, but I went through all of them in that moment. And, the making the bargains and all of that. And finally got to the point where I slid into acceptance. My sweater's gone. I'm going to be chilly. I really like that sweater. But you know what? The bike gods said so. So be it. It is gone. And that's when something remarkable happened. I'm at this campground, and there's a whole bunch of people on bikes, and we're all sharing the same spot. A guy who I'd never met before, but who I learned was from Utah, piped up and he said, "Hey, what color was it? I think I saw it back there." And I was like, "Well, it was dark green." And he goes, "Yeah, that's funny. I did see it. It was back by that lily farm we passed about 10 miles back." And I was like, oh, jeez, 10 miles. And, the acceptance stage of grief was already starting to cool down along with the rest of my body. And I was like, well, losing things, it just happens while you're on bike tour. I'm totally dismissive of the whole thing. I'm sort of, trying to put on the brave, whatever. It doesn't really mean much to me. So the guy's like, "Oh, no, don't worry about it. I'll go get it." I'm sitting there going, are you freaking crazy? And he was going to go back 10 miles to get my sweater and bring it back 20 miles. And so I'm sitting there going, look, that is awesome. Thank you. Thank you, guy. Thank you, batshit crazy guy. But, seriously, that's really too much. That's very nice of you. I'll figure something out. I'll buy some obnoxiously high-priced sweatshirt from this obnoxiously high-priced RV catering to commercial campground. And I thought that was all settled. He was like, "Okay, yeah, no problem. So we turned around, and more people started to show up, and there was some more community developing. Some guys who had started in Alaska but were going all the way down to Mexico, they were from Mexico, rolled in, and they started cooking dinner, and we all started hanging out. And the obnoxiously overpriced campground actually sold obnoxiously overpriced beer, which was helpful. And so we all sat down and enjoyed a post-ride beer and warmed up by the fire a little bit. And about 90 minutes later, the group was sort of laughing at some stuff, and then somebody suddenly said, "Hey, where'd that guy from Utah go to? I haven't seen him." And it just dawned on me, holy shit. That guy just totally went back to get that sweater after I told him not to. And I'm like, no. And they're like, what? I said, no, he didn't. Didn't do what? So I explained the whole thing to everybody, and everybody was just sort of awestruck by the whole thing. And right after I had completed telling that story, and everybody's like, that's just nuts. Up he rolls in the finest tradition of stage and screen. And I see this guy rolling up with his bike, and he didn't ride with anything else. He had just his bike, and on the very rear rack, I see my green sweater all rolled up in a ball, very securely bunged to the back of his bike. And in that moment, I stopped going, oh, that guy's totally crazy, but I felt a huge sense of gratitude. And he's like, oh, here you go. I went back and got it. And I said, I thought I told you not to do that. Nah, I needed some extra miles today anyways. And that was a really great moment. Anyways, I handed a beer to the guy and thanked him for his act of generosity. And the next morning, he rode south while I took the day off. And in bike touring, you often run into people again. And I sort of expected to see him. But I never saw him down the road. And I never saw him again. And I take that sweater with me on every tour that I go on. And I always remember that single act of crazy gratitude. The crazy benevolence. And I remember it every time I put on that sweater. And the next time someone asks me why I like bike touring, I show them that sweater. And I tell them the story of generosity. And I let that do the explaining for me.
Yeah, we like to end off the show, as always, with a big thank you to the supporters of the show who are members of the Pedalshift Society. If you like what you hear, you can help maintain Pedalshift as an independent, listener-supported voice while expanding the offerings. We're talking $1, $2, $5 a month. Helps with the cost of hosting the podcast and the website. You can do it for a bit and cancel anytime. One-shot support is welcome as well. If you're not into the small monthly thing, check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Ethan Georgie, Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lane, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Josiah Matthews, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittus, Thomas Skadow, Seth Krieger, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Noah Schroer, Harry Telgadas, John Sikorsky, Richard Killian, Chris Barron, Brian Wren, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Paul Mulvey, Stuart Buchan, Todd Stutz, Mr. T, Roxy Arning, Nathan Poulton, Harry Hugel, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Ruth Divorcey, Michelle Miller, Matthew Lewis, Michael Baker, Billy Crafton, Paul Culbertson, Scott Culbertson, Matt Perry, Danielle Jepson, Cody Flortinger, Tom Beninati, Bobby Ruppel, Roy Everett, Greg Braithwaite, John Mayer, William Cairns, Sandy Pizzio, Derek Wagner, Richard Patch, Mark Messer, and thanks also to all anonymous and past contributors for helping make this show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift Project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.